What is going on, gamers? Hope you're doing well today, and welcome back to Predecessor. Today we're going over another new patch. Patch 0.4 is coming. This is the SHINBI patch. Pretty exciting stuff. So, going to be doing a little bit of a breakdown of the patch today, giving you guys some of my ideas on the changes that are coming through, and some of the stuff that's happening, and how I think it will affect the game going forwards, and what you can expect to, see maybe it's a bit more meta this patch, and a bit more powerful, and maybe what you should start picking up and playing if you want to do well on the patch. So, patch is coming out February 21st. That is tomorrow, as of the release of this video. Will be coming out tomorrow, probably around 12 p.m., 1 p.m. CET is normally when they're going to drop it. But, time to talk about patch 0.4 dropping this Tuesday, February 21st. Comes our headline act, and next year to join the roster, SHINBI. This is also introducing the new primal Fangtooth mechanics. This is a really interesting update to the Fangtooth system and how it works in general. We'll be getting more into that as we get closer to it. And the patch notes, in-game shop is coming with skins. This is actually really exciting for me personally. It's kind of a superficial thing, but I've kind of just got over everybody looking exactly the same every game. You see the hero, it looks exactly the same every game. Like, it's stupid, but I do love seeing different skins in the game and kind of getting a bit of a fresh take with regards to how certain heroes look and stuff. I just think it's going to be cool. I'm definitely really excited to see some of the original Omega skins that are coming in the future. I think they've already, shown a few in the past that look really, really exciting. But I think the ones coming in this patch are generally ones that are already in the epic assets, so nothing too crazy. But, you'll see Gideon being red sometimes, and that's cool enough for me. So we've also got player versus AI coming. Not a big deal for me, but I think this is really cool. For new players who are starting to learn the game, and they can kind of get involved in that and not have to worry about the pressure of playing against other players straight away. And there's some changes to the heroes obviously going through. So let's just get straight into the idea. We've got SHINBI coming. So SHINBI is a melee AP assassin style character, kind of a semi-AP bruiser as well. I think it kind of depends. I think she's like a mix of a bruiser and assassin, kind of a bit of both. Kind of depends how you build her and how she'll be built in the game. Not really sure what my take is on her build and stuff yet. Don't even know if she'll be viable in the mid lane. I'm thinking probably not. More of an offlaner. But it's cool to have a new AP offlaner in the game. I think AD mid is something that's really cool in this game. Playing AD carries or stuff like Feng Mao, I think it's a lot of fun for me personally. And having like an AP offlaner that's solid is really cool, because we've got Severog, kind of got Steel as well. They're both magical damage heroes, but having a SHINBI in the game is another more consistent pick. Is really cool if you do want to be playing AD mids, giving you that magical damage somewhere else in your composition. So she's got her passive Biting Melody. Basically, every hit does additional on-hit magic damage. This gives her her auto attacks scaling magical damage. Essentially, is the way it works for her kit. Is that it lets her build magic power, but she's still getting more magical damage, giving her more consistent DPS. And then every once in a while, it does 4 times bonus damage. So it basically crits for 4 times damage on this effect. And then every time you damage on the ability, you reduce the cooldown by 1 second. And I think, like with Circle Rhythm, for example, it's a per second effect, and you'll be lowering Biting Melody a lot. So it's basically giving her a lot of in-fight DPS, which is melee brawling. And it kind of synergizes with her other abilities quite effectively to let her proc this bonus crit damage pretty consistently, essentially. Power ability, Lion Tempo, summons a Spirit Wolf, fires in a straight line, just does magic damage, passes through every target. So this is why she could maybe work mid lane. It's a pretty low cost mana and low CD spell that could give her the wave clear, that could make her function as a mid laner if the character is strong. I think she'll probably be pickable there, mainly because of this spell. But we'll just see how it goes. Yeah, I'm not gonna make any judgments here. You guys know that I love playing mid lane the most. I'll obviously try to make it work, but yeah, I'm not really sure. Just based on the way that her kit works in general, if she will function there correctly. Her second ability, her E, Circle Rhythm, a bit of a longer cooldown, but basically it gives her a shield. The wolves summon around her that gives her a shield. And then you do burning magical damage to nearby enemies. So essentially, it's kind of like having a Fire Blossom, but just baked into her kit, and it gives her a shield as well. I think I'm not sure if this is per wolf, so it's a 40 shield per wolf. I think it might be because it's 4 wolves, but I'm not really sure. Either way, I think if it isn't, it's a very small shield, but it does have like some magical power scaling. But I think maybe you get it twice, because yeah, you get it. So you get it when you summon them, and then you get it after the wolves expire. So yeah, I think maybe it procs twice, and I'm not sure if it's per wolf. Yeah, I'm really not sure about this ability and how it functions, just on reading it. I was trying to make sense of it before, and I still don't really get it, but yeah, I think, either way, basically just your standard, gives her a shield, lets her run and beat people up, and yeah, it's more about proccing the Biting Melody passive than this damage itself. It's definitely more about getting a lower cooldown on this, so you do more damage, when you're kind of beating them up with her. I mean, I say beating her up, she obviously has swords, but you know what I mean. When she's melee brawling, she's getting that bonus damage. And then Rushing Beat has her dash ability. She basically dashes forwards, and then if you once you dash once, you can dash again within 3 seconds. It's the cool K-pop sounding one that goes dude. So she definitely, she's got this double dash. So this is her way to get in on a fight. And yeah, so I think with these 3 abilities as like her main kit, she's definitely potentially possibly playing on mid lane. Her wave clear is like kind of okay. It's pretty low damage early, but it has a really low cooldown, so you can kind of spam it a bit more often than some other abilities. But yeah, maybe you even just max the third ability even for that's wave clear. I don't know. I think maybe her wave clear is a little bit too slow for mid lane, but I'll probably give it a try. And you know, her dash does damage to the wave as well. There's definitely different options you have. And then her ultimate is all kill. So basically, whenever you deal damage, you apply a debuff on every enemy. It's called track, and yeah, every time you do a proc of damage, you stack it up to 8 times, and then when you activate the ult, it will jump at everybody, or jump at the target with the most track stacks. It does bonus damage per stack. So essentially, you know, you want to pick a target, try and get many stacks on as possible, pop the ultimate, and you know, and then you're doing even at base. It's 120 times 8. It's a big number. I'll get there. Wait, 960. So 960 plus 18%. So it's like basically, again, you multiply this by 8. You know, so it's got really high actual scaling because this is, you know, it's kind of like with the way Rev's Q was working last patch. It's basically 120 plus 18 per wolf, and that's up to 8 times. So this really, you know, mathematically gets huge. She could definitely like hone in on a single target, stack up track, and then just completely obliterate them with the massive cast of all kill, especially once she gets a lot more magical power built up and is able to, you know, utilize this even more effectively. So I think she's a cool character. Yeah, I think probably more of an offlaner. Maybe works in the jungle, could possibly work in mid. Not gonna make any assumptions yet, but yeah, I think she definitely seems like a good addition to the game. Just having more magical damage or you know, choices in the offlane or in the jungle in general, I think is really healthy, and she's definitely gonna be a good addition. So the in-game story is coming. This is an example of some of the skins I talked about. I love this classic Lizard Murdoch. This was one in Fault as well. I use this one all the time, so this is really cool to see. And then we got Red Gideon, Red Countess, Blue Drongo. This Drongo skin I think is actually a little different. I think he does have like a different face, and I think maybe he's got a different backpack or something. So this does have some model changes overall, but yeah. So this is an example of some of the skins. I think they said 12 are coming, so we don't know all of them just on the patch, but 12 skins are coming. And like I said, it just adds a bit more variety to the game, you know, just appearance-wise. It just gets a bit mundane seeing the same skins, same heroes every game. And I just like this vibe of having slightly different skins that aren't just the ones that came from the legendary package bonus and such. So getting into the Fangtooth update. Fangtooth has actually been reworked now. So now the passive buffs cap out at 3. They're functionally the same. Jungle buff duration plus 50%, capped at 30 seconds. So you only get a 30-second bonus. This is mainly for things like Orb Prime, and, you know, the new Fangtooth buff that we'll talk about in a second. So, yeah, basically 40 plus 50% on jungle buffs and river buff duration. And then you got out of combat move speed 8%. And then the third buff is now just 8% physical power, physical armor, and magical armor. So, obviously very familiar, very similar. It's 6% now, right? But it's 8% in the next patch of the third buff. And then after this, you now gain no more passive buff. So, it no longer stacks infinitely like it does now. You won't be getting the scaling power every single time you get the Fangtooth. Instead, once you kill 3... once the third Fangtooth has died, the next Fangtooth all Fangtooths after that will now be Primal Fangtooth. So it's a bigger, kind of different model version of Fangtooth that spawns after the third one. It will continue to get the passive buffs. If you have 0 Fangtooth buffs and you take a Primal Fangtooth, you will get 1 stack of the buff. You'll get the jungle buff duration. But it gives you a new effect buff, a temporary buff called Primordial Blaze. Essentially does every time you deal damage to enemy targets, you set them aflame, dealing I don't know the base damage here, but you do a certain amount of damage plus 2 per minute of game time. True damage per second for 4 seconds. It's increased by 50% against enemy heroes who are below HP, so it's got like an execute mechanic on it. And it's capped at 80 true damage per second, so it's capped at doing 320 burn, essentially, at like the max damage it deals. I don't know what the base damage is. It might just be 2 minute per game time true damage. Maybe it doesn't have any base damage. I guess that would make sense as well, because then at 40 minutes, it would scale to the max. So essentially, at 40 minutes, it'd be the strongest Primordial Blaze you can get. So yeah, you have like essentially, yeah, every time you deal a tick of damage, it's kind of like when you apply Megacosm. You said to it this true damage debuff burn that then executes heroes that are really low. So basically, this is a new buff. This is gonna be even stronger than Prime in fights. This is essentially changing Fangtooth from being this eternally scaling mechanic. Feels like if you lose like 3-4 Fangtooths, we've had these games, right? Maybe you're having a solid game, but your jungler just hasn't been able to get to the Fangtooth pit. You've just been losing or getting picked right before Fangtooth. The enemy's managed to pick up like 3-4 Fangtooths, and the game essentially feels pretty unwinnable at that point, just because of the raw amount of stats they gain. A lot of people complain about this. The Fangtooth just feels like a super snowballing mechanic. As soon as you kind of lose track and ability to cling onto the Fangtooths, you just can't even interact with the enemy team at a certain point because they've just got such a stat advantage that even if you're even in gold, even if you're ahead in gold, just being so far behind on that percent stat increase could just make the game feel completely unplayable. You start getting one shot, you can't kill anybody, same old. So they're kind of reworking and move away from that mechanic, only getting this 8% buff now. Now, this is still pretty substantial. If you do have 3 Fangtooths, you are going to get rewarded. But instead, yeah, you now have this Primordial Blaze effect. So if you are down to 0 Fangtooth and you manage to win the 4th Fangtooth, you will only get the single buff now, but you get this incredibly strong effect instead. So even, you know, you can have, this essentially adds a little bit more macro to the early game of like, even now, there's a lot of people who are like, you know, I don't want to fight the first Fangtooth, it's really slow, I'd rather farm my jungle more and focus on the first prime, the midi prime. You can now play that playstyle even more effectively because you don't have to worry about that super insane stacking mechanic going 3+. Obviously, the 4th Fangtooth and onwards, very, very strong. I think we'll see games get closed out a lot easier now because this buff is way easier to use than prime. And I think the primal Fangtooth is still easier to take than all prime is in general. But yeah, this buff is going to be super easy to use. People are going to get completely obliterated by it for a long time. So I think games are actually going to close out a lot faster off this 4th Fangtooth. But yeah, you can it kind of changes up the macro game of the early mid game, changes how it works, and then essentially, yeah, adds this kind of new element of you don't have to play, you can't play for the stacking Fangtooths as aggressively now. This 3rd buff is still really strong. These buffs are still great. But even if you are getting these early Fangtooths, it's not going to secure you a win like it did in the previous patch. If the enemy team fights you and they take the 4th Fangtooth, they're going to be much stronger than they would, you know, if you were 3 Fangtooths up and then they just got 1 Fangtooth. It didn't really matter last patch. But this patch, getting that Primordial Blaze effect is going to do insane damage, regardless of how many Fangtooth stacks you have. So yeah, essentially just changes the early macro, pulls a bit of the focus away from early Fangtooths. I think mini prime is going to be a lot stronger this patch, and you should be looking for it a lot more because giving up early Fangtooths isn't as punishing. Going into the mid-late game. But that 4th Fangtooth and onwards, really, really scary. Definitely going to be a source of a lot of team fights. Maybe we'll start seeing people go for like all prime versus primal Fangtooth trades a lot more, you know, aggressively and kind of weighing the value of those trades. I think the all prime buff is actually really strong in fights as well in Predecessor. But yeah, this Primordial Blaze, you know, you can just see the insane damage. 320 true damage burn every time you do a tick of damage. You know, for mages, for ADCs, there's so much damage in a team fight. So yeah, especially like AoE mages, something like Gadget, you can imagine. You just throw out the RMB and you have like just insane, you know, it won't be 320 all the time. It'll be, you know, more like 250, 300 maybe, but still, just an insane amount of damage. Even just getting like 1 tick of RMB on 4 heroes, that's like 1,000 plus true damage. And you just can't do anything about it. So yeah, definitely a really, really insane buff. Something to look out for, and will change the macro game a lot. It's hard to predict fully how it'll affect Pred overall, but it will definitely make a big difference, and it'd be really interesting to play for. I'm definitely excited to see it tested more on the live servers. So you got player versus AI coming. Not really a big deal for me, but yeah, like I said, I think it's really cool for new players that they have this option. And yeah, so give a try out to AI. It seems pretty solid to me. Gadget-based skin change. They're changing the gadget skin to the Shell Shock skin. I don't really have any strong feelings about this. I think the Shell Shock skin looks really cool. But yeah, I don't really know the rationale behind this necessarily. I guess they want a more battle-ready aesthetic, but yeah, it's not really a big deal to me. I know some people are upset that she's losing the original skin, but overall, I think the new skin looks fine and looks pretty cool, so no complaints from me. Other improvements, total damage to heroes is now at the top of hero stats, that's pretty cool, and then there's some other stuff in here. There's something else that's pretty cool, I think. So the visual effects of Sentry have been updated again. Death animations, I think, have been reworked and fixed. Oh yeah, so client server delay on range basic attacks has been reduced by 50%. This is pretty big. Essentially, you'll generally feel like your shots come out a little bit faster sometimes. It's not dramatically noticeable, I think, overall, but it will be impactful occasionally. And then Gideon's sound effects have been updated. I don't think anything else in here is... Yeah, so map improvements help increase performance, and then phase jumping sound effects. Yeah, so most of this is kind of whatever. Crunch. Okay, so yeah, balance changes. Crunch is once again getting nerfed. They just can't let this hero get away with it, can they? Left Crunch's base damage is getting reduced a bit, but the scaling is getting increased. So they mentioned here that they want to shift his spike away from the level 6 power spike a bit more into more of a mid-game strength. I think that's kind of where Crunch is at his strongest anyway. Once he gets to like 6 obviously has a big spike, and then when he gets to like, you know, maybe like level 8 through level 13, I think that's when Crunch is his strongest, when he can kind of utilize that RMB, RE combo really effectively, CC someone down and kind of just beat them up. But yeah, the base damage of Left Crunch is getting dropped a little bit, especially at rank 5, it's going down 25 base damage, and obviously with the way his ultimate works, it's essentially 50 reduction because he's using the same spell twice. And then the base damage from his right crunch is getting raised by 5 at every rank, but yeah, not super substantial. But yeah, so basically it's a bit of a net nerf to his overall dueling power, his overall wave clear. But he is getting that kind of increased physical power scaling. So yeah, during that like level 8, level 13 kind of mid-game spike, he is doing a lot, I'd say a noticeable more damage because he's got total scaling as well. So he will be doing noticeably more. But yeah, definitely a bit of a hit to that kind of like level 6 to level 9 maybe kind of trading pattern. He will be feeling a little bit weaker till he gets maybe 1-2 items and kind of gets them on lock. Gideon, so they talk about the True Silver Bracelet Gideon build here again. Very, very popular, especially if competitive. If you guys check out the Agora stream, the Agora tournament series, The Team Ice Up or Team Immune, Empty, especially big Gideon player, loves this True Silver Gideon build. Definitely still really effective on this patch, even with the True Silver nerfs, didn't really get changed that much. So they're lowering Gideon's health growth by 5 per level, essentially, so that's 90 at level 18. It's definitely a little bit substantial, but I don't think it really touches much on the build itself, especially because True Silver doesn't actually scale with base health, it scales with bonus health, so he's still going to be getting that shield for the same strength. He is going to lack a little bit more HP. They want to make it a little bit more vulnerable, but overall, it's going to be pretty similar and not that different. In my opinion, it won't really change that much about Gideon's strength, and I think Gideon is the best mid laner. Currently, just has the most flexibility, and with this build, it's super easy to play. You could definitely have games where you're like, okay, I want to go for like a Wraith leggings, Caustica, burst damage build and try and one-shot people. That can work in some games, but most games, you could just go for this True Silver engage build, and you could just run in ult on people, and they can't really do anything about it. Especially if you start, tripling down, you're like a Megacosm, you have a bunch of ability haste, you get like a World Breaker, you can even build like a Raymond, just to kind of get your True Silver shield even larger. And then obviously, yeah, it's not kind of the same as the tank Gideon meme that was having a bit before, but he's still a very tanky and kind of bruisery build, and especially with the increase on ability or magical power on items in this patch in general, to kind of offset the nerfs they did to Oblivion Crown before, it's a really easy build to play, and just still feel like you do really competitive damage while being way safer and way tankier than most mages. And you just play for that ultimate with Megacosm and just kind of pop everybody in an AoE team fight. So he's still going to be really fine. I think he'll still be the best and safest mage in general. Muriel. So Muriel's getting a super huge rework, essentially. It's not quite as drastic as it did. For a second, if you opened the patch notes, you would have seen the R&B is getting like 2 charges or something crazy, but they ended up pulling that out. But yeah, so the slow and the slow duration power of her Q is getting buffed a bit. This is really big for her lane phase. Gives her the ability to chase down these melee supports or carries a bit more effectively and get a lot more damage. And the duration getting increased is actually pretty big, because I believe the duration as well is tethered to the damage amplifier, which is actually also increasing the duration of the damage amplification, I think. So I think this is all kind of linked together. So yeah, really big buff for her laning phase here. Alacrity now has magical power scaling. This is really big. It didn't have any scaling before, so the shield was just really weak the whole game, but now it's a lot more impactful, and it also scales with heal and shield power, which it wasn't before, apparently. So her R&B was shielding a lot more in this patch in general. She just picks up a lot of magical power items passively, just the support items generally have a lot of magical power, so she will be benefiting from this a lot. She's getting a big increase to the base shield of Consecrated Ground, especially at rank 5. 50 shield is actually a huge substantial buff for her. And then the cooldown is getting increased a bit at every rank to compensate, but overall, just I think, you're mostly only getting one off anyway most of the time when it matters, and then having a much bigger shield, especially because obviously healing and shielding power is multiplicative. So if the base value is higher, she's getting a lot more value out of those stats, and it's way better to build now because obviously your alacrity is scaling as well. So yeah, overall, it's going to be a really substantial buff first because you'll be shielding for a lot more with Consecrated Ground. And then Reversal of Fortune, the stun duration is getting decreased, but the charge up time is getting decreased as well. There's some really big quality of life. If you played Muriel, you probably know how painful her ult can be sometimes. So you're trying to reactively ult someone really quickly, it can be really difficult. This is going to be a big buff, but as a result, they are kind of removing that kind of follow-up stun duration punish. Maybe you played against Steel Muriel as well. That kind of combo is really, really annoying to play against. You get Steel ulted, and Muriel comes down straight afterwards, you get knocked up again. Literally can't play the game. So they're nerfing the kind of power that she has in that regard with the follow-up. And this is also enabling her to lower the cooldown a bit and make it more into a defensive tool with a bit of a lower cooldown. And I think this is actually really solid. I think Muriel's ult being 3 minutes is nuts. I would much rather the ult is like a bit weaker. And it had a lower cooldown, because I think having it at like 3 minutes base is just so painful. Even 160 is a really long time. But yeah, it will enable her to use it maybe once, twice more a game. And I think that feels a lot better, because I think it's just not fun to be a character and feel like you can barely use what is honestly quite a situational ultimate anyway. Not only is it quite situational, it also has a really long cooldown. I think it's just, even if you can talk about how broken it is or how strong it is, I think it's just not fun to have it on such a low cooldown when it's already quite situational. I think it'd be much better, yeah, like I said, if it's a bit weaker, but just way more usable. It has a way lower cooldown, even if it's a lesser effect. I think it's better in general for the Muriel player if it is a bit more usable, and you can just feel like you have more impact rather than feeling like you have this massive button that you can barely press half the time. Narbash. So Narbash has been super insane this patch. It's actually the best support, in my opinion, and it's not even very close. His Song of My People has been super insane spell this patch. If you've been maxing it this patch, I feel like anytime Narbash is maxing E, he's way too broken. So yeah, they substantially nerfed the heal again. They buffed it a lot. I think this is pretty similar to the numbers it was before, or maybe even worse. And then the scaling has been lowered a bit as well, and then his base mana's always gone down. But yeah, so they're definitely trying to push him back into that Thunk Max strategy. I think he's still very solid. Honestly, I think he was really good before. I don't think he was bad before at all. I think he was just a bit different. He didn't have as much healing power, and he was more kind of focused around just the strength of his laning and thunk in general. I think he was still really good, and I think he'll still be really good this patch, honestly. Don't be baited by the fact that he's getting nerfed and think that he'll be unplayable. The character will still be really good, honestly. This character is better than Richter. I will stake my life on it. Maybe not that dramatic, but I promise you, when I say that, I firmly believe Novice is much better support than like Richter is, for example. Debatably, something like Steel, I think, honestly, but I think Novice is just such a solid character. He brings so much utility, and I don't think these passive, these nerfs will push him out of the lane of the game at all. Realistically, if people are committed to still playing him, I think he'll still be really, really solid. There's no reason to drop him just off these nerfs, because everything is pushing him kind of similar to what he was before. But I think before he was still really good. It's just this patch made him like turbo broken for like no reason. But yeah, so I think he'll still be really solid, even though these are kind of painful nerfs for the character. I think he'll still be pretty much the most stable melee support available. Rampage. Oh, you love to see Rampage getting nerfs, dude. I absolutely hate this character. So physical power growth is getting lowered by 0.5, pretty substantial, and the health scaling on pounce is getting lowered as well. This is pretty big because you max pounce last normally, so you won't be getting a lot of the base damage value. You're pretty much relying on that health scaling the whole game. So this would be pretty big, especially because Rampage builds a lot of health in his iron build anyway. And then Rumble's damage is getting increased at lower ranks and then lowered at later ranks. So this will actually speed up his jungle clear a little bit, I think. The bonus power, physical power scaling is getting lowered. Honestly, it'll probably round out about the same because he's got a little bit less AD, and he's got a bit less pounce scaling. So I guess it depends whether you started with sword or health crystal before, because obviously it depends if you were going like Mutilator, Bone Saw, or if you were going for Fire Blossom. But yeah, overall, I think his jungle clear should be roughly the same, maybe a little bit slower. But yeah, it's basically just a hit on a lot of his scalings and his like kind of passive damage he gains, you know. So he's got less scaling on physical power on E, less health scaling on R&B, and then less physical damage. So it's basically just bringing back his DPS a bit overall, just across the kit all around. Revenant, so they're already obliterating, excuse my pun, the Revenant AP build, which I think is pretty funny. I thought it was a bit crazy. They just randomly gave an 80% AP ratio to Scar, magical power ratio, sorry, to Scar. That was pretty funny, and it's definitely made this this magical Rev build you probably see going around, which is very confusing because it doesn't actually do any magic damage. It does complete physical damage, basically. Does a little bit with Scar's debuff, but not that much. It's basically a full physical damage build where he fully builds magical power and he just shoots Q from a million miles away and it does like 1k damage. So it's pretty funny to watch, but it's definitely very obnoxious. I don't think it's very fun to be in the game. So I never understand them trying to kind of push it out already. And then as a result, they're also buffing the bonus physical power scaling he gets from critical strike chance to, again, push him more into an AD build. It's such a pretty substantial buff. Basically, 50% increase on the value he gets from building crit. So instead of, 10% bonus physical power, you're now getting 15% bonus physical power at a full crit build, and that's a 5%, increase on his overall power. And he gets a lot anyway because he's, stacking from, so many sources, and he converts a lot of his stats into physical power. So it's actually a very big substantial buff to crit rev. That should not be, it looks kind of whatever because they're just trying to make it so people build crit, but it's quite substantial overall. If you look into the math, it's easily 40-50 damage on his hits late game, which is a lot. Especially combined with critting, you're doubling that value. So definitely a huge buff to crit rev. I think rev is pretty solid as an AD carry already. Maybe a little bit less consistent than something like a Murdoch, just due to the nature of his kit. He doesn't really have any self-peel outside of the ultimate, but, I think this will push him into maybe being a bit more in the limelight. He kind of had a small burst of wind in competitive where everyone was like, whoa, this character's so cool, he's critting for massive damage, I'm going to play Rev, and then he just completely disappeared again. But I think he's pretty solid overall, and should probably be explored a bit more. I think he's got a really strong lane phase especially. He's a lot safer and stronger in lane, I find, because he trades a lot more effectively than something like a Murdoch. Even a Drongo, I think he kind of out-trades Drongo at a similar range. Drongo's advantage is like that he normally has a lot more range, right, when it comes to like the R&B in lane trading, but Revenant kind of matches that, and I think he has a lot higher base damages. So yeah, I think he's a very solid early game ADC with a really good late game as well. It's more just like this mid game trough I think he has where he's not super effective, but ignoring that, I think the character's really solid, and as people get better at him, he'll probably end up popping into the meta a bit more in competitive, especially. Richter's getting a bit of a nerf, losing a bit of mana regen, and the hook mana cost is getting increased. I think Richter is really overrated, honestly. He's definitely gonna have good stats. Because people just get hooked. But I think, like, Blitzcrank, for an example, League of Legends, there was a time where Blitzcrank was broken in League of Legends, and then people stopped getting hooked. And I think that's, like, the main thing, is people just have to learn to play against Richter a bit more, get a bit more time against him, and I think his win rate will steadily decline. I think it probably, has been declining since the start overall, at, like, higher elos probably, or, like, medium elos. I think if you looked at it, it probably has been declining since the start of the game, because I think people just get better at playing around it, playing against it, feeling more confident to kind of play aggressive into Richter as well is a big thing, I think, as well. Not being scared of the hook and feeling like you always have to be afraid of it, and just kind of being a bit more confident in dodging it so you can kind of hit him and play aggressive. I think it's a big thing. But yeah, overall, I think Novice is a more solid character in general. But I do get why he's getting nerfed, especially in solo queue. I'm sure he's pretty dominant. Several getting nerfed here. He's been super dominant this patch as the buffs. His health regeneration is getting lowered a bit. And then the healing he's getting from Cipher is also getting lowered as well, which I think is pretty understandable. He's going to get a bit of a physical power scaling decrease on Cipher. This is only really relevant for the Mutilator sub build, which isn't that common, but it is played enough that I think, it is noticeable. But yeah, it's basically just getting lowered on his minion healing and his health regeneration. So just his passive healing, essentially, stuff where he doesn't actually interact with the enemy hero, is kind of getting mitigated. And so yeah, you are still getting the same healing from Cipher if you are hitting the enemy hero, for example. But it's just the healing on minions and the health regen against base is getting lowered. So he does have to be a bit more active to get the rewards from his sustain. Divine Wreath is now getting fixed, so you can stack Wreaths. I don't know if this would be a real thing, but maybe it is. Maybe you could just stack Divine Wreath and just get insane heal and shield power on something like Muriel or something like Novice. I don't know if this will work, but I think it's funny and it could be worth trying. At the very least, it's very cool. That they kind of fix this out, and even I think just building one of these early game on something like Novice or Muriel is actually really nice and gives you a lot of power and your abilities, so it could be worth trying in that regard. Nightfall is getting a bit of a rework. It's losing the Omnivamp base that it gets, but it is getting an increase on physical penetration that it provides, and the isolation range is getting decreased a little bit, so you do have to be closer to one champion, I guess, one hero. It's confusing to think about what this actually means, but I guess it's like, yeah, if you're within 500 range of one character. So I guess it's a bit of a buff maybe to the isolation range. I can't really work out in the moment whether it's like a buff or enough, but it's probably not going to affect that much that often. And then the Omnivamp is getting increased when you do have the stacks. When you have the effect stacked up, I think you need 3 hits or 3 procs of damage, and then you get the max stack effect. Just gives you bonus attack speed and Omnivamp. So yeah, once you have that proc, you are getting a bit more Omnivamp than we were before, but it's a bit more active. It's not just like unconditional healing. That's generally what they're trying to take away here from most of these items, I think. But overall, I think Nightfall's still a pretty bad item. This won't really affect it that much. It is a bit juicier. 12 pen is a lot more substantial than 4. So it definitely could see play. I think statistically, it's just a much stronger item now. I think the Omnivamp kind of didn't fit really what it wanted to do as much. I suppose a little bit, but yeah, I don't know. I think the item's just kind of a weird item that will never really fit a normal build. And it doesn't really work for any of the real bruisers in offlane. The only really character you can really think of is like Fengmao, but Fengmao in offlane is just so weak in general that it doesn't really make sense. So as a result, no one really builds it. Mutilator is getting a slight decrease on the Omnivamp and an increase on the ability haste. I actually think this is overall a buff to the item. I think the 3% Omnivamp is kind of whatever compared to getting 5 haste. As a first item, this will still feel really good for a lot of characters. So yeah, I think while this is a bit of a rework to like lower some sustain and kind of force people to recall a bit more often, perhaps, I think it is a bit of a buff to in combat for sure, with regards to getting +5 haste off one item. And then Tectonic Man is getting a bit of a rework where they're removing the Omnivamp because it was a bit weird, and they're adding 10 ability haste and increasing the magical armor. So yeah, I think this item is actually still pretty unexplored because it only kind of started working properly recently. I think this could definitely work in some like AP offlane matchups, stuff like if you're playing against Gadget, for example, or something like a Grux or something like this. I think it's actually a really nice item to kind of build in that kind of matchup, so you can just run them down. And this could also probably work pretty well into Shinbi or something. Even as a first item, I think Tectonic Man is actually not that bad. It's just a little bit weird, and it hasn't really been explored much because the item was kind of bugged before, so it didn't really work properly. But now I think it could definitely get some mileage out of it, and I think it's definitely worth trying, especially, yeah, it kind of just amplifies what it was doing well already. Honestly, I think the Omnivamp is maybe a bit more useful, I guess, something like a Gadget, but, getting 10 haste is still really nice, and you have a bit more magic armor, and the move speed especially. In a matchup where you have to close the gap, like something against a Gadget, or like, maybe some sort of mage offlane, having that additional move speed is really valuable. So definitely, I would say give it a try if you're in that kind of situation in offlane. But outside of offlaners, I don't think this item has much merit, because maybe it could work in jungle if you're against a heavy AP comp and you're something physical, but yeah, generally I don't think it has much merit outside of that condition. And then Wellspring is getting a bit of a bug fix where, no longer ceases to work when it comes to cooldown when the player is dead, so this is obviously a pretty massive buff. And then the quality of life is now checks the target ally nearby, and if they are damaged for committing the cooldown of Soothing Waters. So it won't use the big cooldown if nobody's damaged and you're using abilities. It actually preserves it. So it's a pretty bit off to Wellspring, which I think is already a pretty good item. This will help it a lot with regards to being a bit more consistent. And then bug fixes down here. I think there's some substantial ones in here. I know there's definitely the Gideon one in here. Gideon's passive on Murdoch has got a fix. That's not the one I mean. I mean the one about Gideon. This is a lot of bug fixes, man. Gideon. Anything super substantial in here? Gideon. Gideon with not basic attack when damaging enemy heroes multiple abilities. There you go. So Gideon's passive kind of had a bug if you're a Gideon player where you just couldn't auto attack after using ability sometimes, and they have fixed that one. So that's the biggest one for me. A lot of different stuff in here. I'd recommend taking a look and see if there's anything for your mains that you play. I know this footstep sounds one. I think this is a pretty big one where a lot of footsteps have been fixed around the map. So you definitely probably hear people a lot better around certain locations where it was bugged before. But yeah, that's patch 0.4. So definitely a pretty exciting patch. I think overall, meta-wise, I think a lot of it's going to stay the same in most lanes. Gideon will still be the best mid laner, I think, because there hasn't been much changes with regards to mid lane in this patch. Severog might be a bit weaker this patch. He's pretty much dominating the off lane, but he will definitely be brought down. I think support will be the biggest one. Muriel a lot stronger now. Nalbash still really good. Richter still fine. Steel support still solid. Rampage, I think he'll still be the best jungler. I think these changes just bring down his general DPS a little bit, but he'll still be really, really solid. Definitely the best. I think Crunch is in a weird position in general. I don't think Crunch is bad, but I don't think he's so good still that he needs nerfs. But I guess he's just still slapping people just by being a bit face roll. But yeah, 0.4, definitely very exciting. If you guys enjoyed this content, make sure to leave a like. It really helps out the channel. You can also subscribe for more videos like this. And yeah, go ahead and tell me in the comments what you're most excited for this patch, or what you think will be the biggest winner. Who will be dominating the meta in patch 0.4? I'm definitely excited to play on it coming out on the 21st. So yeah, hope to see you guys again in the next video, and hope you have a great time at 0.4. I will catch you later. Peace!